Okay. Here we go. All right. Thank you all for being kind of patient with me. My name is Liz Wallace. I am an elder law attorney at Agile Elder Law, and I'm going to talk today on the first of our winter webinar series about long-term care and asset protection for adults of all ages. So I'm going to cover some of the basics of long-term care, what it costs, how you pay for it, and what sort of things you can do to prepare ahead of time for that. At the end, I will give plenty of time for questions. You can also always email me or call me later if you have more questions. Right. So I'm going to start with what is long-term care. You probably hear this term a lot, and I think that sometimes there is some confusion about what really constitutes long-term care and what is more medical care. So I want to start out by clarifying that long-term care is not just medical care. Medical care is like you get sick, you go to the doctor, you get prescriptions, or you go to the hospital, have surgery. Those sorts of things are medical care. And though those things come hand in hand with long-term care is more than that. It's companionship and care. It is assistance with activities of daily living. So activities of daily living are things that you do every day that you might need help with. Things like preparing food, eating, medication management, transitioning, getting out of bed, getting showered, toileting, all of those things that you do on a daily basis. When you get to the point where you need some assistance with them, that is where we get into talking about long-term care. It's also some care that usually lasts more than a few weeks or months, and more than just rehabilitation. So I bring this up because I think this is also the part that gets a little confusing, and I'm going to talk more about this later when I talk about Medicare versus Medicaid. Rehabilitation care happens oftentimes when folks who are either disabled or older maybe fall down, break something, or get in an accident, have a broken bone, or some other medical condition, stroke sometimes, where afterwards they'll require a period of care and assistance with their activities of daily living while they are rehabilitating their body and trying to come back to a place where they no longer require care. That's rehabilitation. And generally when we're talking about long-term care, that's not just rehabilitation. It's care that lasts beyond that point. Most Americans will have an experience of long-term care at some point in their lifetime. It might not be you. It might be a parent, it might be a spouse, it might be a child, or it might be you. But somewhere near, we're coming up on, I think, 2/3 now of people in the US at some point in time are going to need long-term care as they get older. So even if you yourself don't experience it, you're likely to experience it with a family member or someone else close to you or a spouse. So long-term care can be provided in several different situations and several different scenarios. So I want to kind of touch on each of them. You could get long-term care at home. So when you have care at home, that means that you still live primarily in your home, and maybe you even take care of yourself many days, but you have some assistance that comes in for anywhere from a couple of hours a week to 24-hour care. But that is somebody who comes from outside into your home and cares for you in the place in which you live. So this is not when you move into a facility, but when you get care at home. There are lots and lots of in-home care options and companies that provide that kind of care, even some that provide registered nurses and some pretty significant medical care as well as normal long-term care in their home. Usually when a person gets to the point where they require more care than a couple of hours a day, a facility is sometimes a better fit, but lots of people really want to stay home. I think that's pretty easy to imagine. I mean, I know I would want to stay home if I was going to receive care. And so for folks who can afford it, I have seen people who get 24-hour care in their home for a long time, but it gets really expensive once you get past the couple of hours a day of bringing someone into the home. So there are some other options once you have either decided for monetary, social, or other reasons that you're not going to stay at home. You can move into a facility, and there are lots of different facilities and different care situations and facilities. The first of these is an adult family home. So an adult family home, it's also called an adult care home sometimes in other states. Um, an adult family home is a situation where there is a home and there are a smaller number of people who live there. So maybe it's usually between 6, 12, maybe a little bit more than that, but generally not more than about 12 people who live in one home. And each of them have, their bedrooms and bathrooms. It's much more like a home than a facility. And there's a shared kitchen usually, and then there's staff who either live there or who rotate through the 24-hour period so that the residents live there like a family almost. That's why they call it an adult family home. So it's like living in a home, but you're not just there yourself, you're there with other residents, but a small number of people and staff that either live there or come in for shifts and are always there to take care of you and assist you with things. An assisted living facility has a similar level of care as an adult family home, but in this case, you're looking at usually a larger facility. So you're going to have more people there, and this is more like they might have, each person might have almost like an apartment that they live in. And then there are staff there in the facility that come into their space and take care of them, but there's always someone in the facility, even if there's not always someone in your room taking care of you. Assisted living facilities generally also have a much higher level of kind of social programming that goes on there. So you have people who come in and live there, and then there are lots of other residents, and so there are activities and outings and presentations and movie nights and all of that kind of planned by the facility and provided by the facility, either there or with transportation, appropriate transportation to them. And there's kind of a lot more social interaction there because there's more people who live there. A memory care facility is, again, it's assisted living level of care, just like in an adult family home or an assisted living facility. But in this case, we're really focusing on folks who have, for one reason or another, a need for some assistance with their memory. So it's generally forms of dementia, that there are some other things that will happen to people where memory care might be appropriate. And in these facilities, the focus on the care is not just taking care of someone on a daily basis, but also trying to strengthen mind and memory and at least make that period of decline as someone is going through dementia or Alzheimer's or something else, where they're losing their memory and losing their ability, their cognition. Memory care is kind of a plan, and there are extra activities and extra medical care, and really this focus on trying to at least slow down that decline as much as we can. Skilled nursing facility is the kind of facility that you're going to go into if you need full-time care. And this is when you need 24/7 care. You need someone there all the time to be taking care of you and to be watching you, and you cannot be left alone, or you need the kind of care that only can be provided, if perhaps you need a two-person Hoyer lift or other kinds of really significant assistance with care and with mobility. Then skilled nursing facility is where you're going to receive that kind of care. Generally, people don't spend a large amount of time in a skilled nursing facility. That rehabilitation care that I was talking about earlier and that I'm going to talk about a little more is oftentimes given at skilled nursing facilities because it's a really kind of intensive treatment. And usually when somebody goes to a skilled nursing facility, they're there for a while until they can get to a point where they can then move back into memory care, assisted living, or adult family home, or maybe even go home at some point. So it's really more kind of acute care most of the time. But there are certainly some persons and conditions that do require skilled nursing facilities to take care of someone for an extended amount of time, sometimes years. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was continuing care communities. Continuing care communities kind of incorporate all of this list here. So if you maybe move into a continuing care community before you necessarily need a lot of care, you might either be living independently at home with no care at all, or you might have some in-home care that's coming either from the facility or from an outside company that's bringing that in while you're living in their independent part of their facility. And then the idea behind the continuing care community is that you move in there with the intention that you're going to stay in there as your care needs increase. And so as you need more and more assistance, Those communities either have a facility where independent care can become assisted living care, or they have independent care part of their facility and assisted living part of their facility. And then many of them also have a memory care and sometimes skilled nursing part of their facility. So you can move into this community and stay there as your care needs increase over time without having to move to a different place. So those are the different places and situations in which you can get long-term care. And then we come to the root of why we're even having this presentation. How expensive is it? So these figures are from Washington State, mostly, and Idaho. These are figures that I see on a regular basis with my clients and seem to be pretty average across these states over here. Of course, on the west side of Washington, these are going to be significantly more expensive, and then other states will vary as well. In-home care, this one, again, this can vary so widely because it depends on how much care you need. So if all you need is someone to come in for an hour or two a day, a couple of times a week, then you're not going to be paying a whole lot of money. Maybe you're going to pay $1,000 a month. But if you need someone there full time, I have seen upwards of $15,000 a month for people having in-home care come into just for pretty basic care needs, but for someone who cannot be on their own. Adult family homes, they tend to start at a little bit less than assisted living facilities. Around here, it's about $2,500 for a pretty basic level of care. But then they go up to, $6,000 or $7,000 a month. Assisted living facilities start a little higher, more like around the $3,000 range for very limited care, up to maybe $7,000 or $8,000 a month. Memory care, because there are more, memory care is more involved in not only the care for the person, safety for folks who maybe need a locked facility, but also just those extra elements to their care, then that's going to be more expensive. And then we're talking, $4,500 again for a very kind of basic level of memory care, up to easily $10,000 a month for pretty good memory care, pretty extensive memory care. And skilled nursing facilities, I have here kind of the state. So the state Medicaid average, which is a low end for the state of Washington, is actually closer to $10,000 a month. And I easily see $14,000, $15,000 a month right in the average on a skilled nursing facility if you're paying out of pocket. And then I always kind of am amazed by some of the numbers that I see. Highest I've ever seen skilled nursing for one person was $33,000 a month that he was paying for care. So how do we pay for it? There are several ways people pay for long-term care. Of course, there's personal income and resources. You can spend your income and the money that you save up for the rest of your life on your care until it's gone. That's one way to do it. Medicare does pay for, again, rehabilitation only. I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about how each of these work, but that maxes out at about 100 days, and it's for rehabilitative care only. Long-term care insurance, I'll talk a little bit about the different ways that comes up. There are VA benefits for veterans and their spouses. And then there's Medicaid. Medicaid pays for more than 60% of the long-term care in the United States overall. Medicaid is by far the largest payer of long-term care, and I'm going to talk about the requirements of that. So first of all, personal income and resources. So if you need care, of course, you can always just write a check for it. You can hire anyone, you can write a check, and you can pay out of pocket and then from your resources as time goes by for the care that you need. Because most of the time when we're talking about this care, we're talking about people who are age 65 or older. Many of them have retired and have a fixed income that's lower than when they were working. Usually Social Security, maybe they have a retirement, but almost always a retirement age person is not making the same amount of money that they did when they were still working. So because of that, whatever resources that they've got stocked up, if they've got money in the bank that they were saving in their savings account, and their care costs $4,000 a month, but their income is $2,000 a month, well, their savings are going to have to supplement that income by the tune of $2,000 a month plus whatever other expenses they have. So over time, those resources are going to dwindle down. And many facilities, so again, facilities, we're talking here about not in-home care and not skilled nursing facilities most of the time. We're talking about here assisted living facilities, adult family homes, and memory care, which again is the bulk of facility care that's given to people. Most of those facilities will have a private pay requirement of 1 to 3 years. Sometimes it's more. What this means is that even if they do accept Medicaid, before they will let you go on to Medicaid, they're going to want you to pay privately for 1 to 3 years of time. So if you move into an assisted living facility that has a 2-year private pay requirement and their private rate is $4,500 a month, then you're going to have to pay that for 2 years before they're going to let you switch over to Medicaid. The reason for that is that Medicaid doesn't reimburse facilities at the same rate that private pay does. So you make less money on Medicaid. And so to kind of balance that out, then they ask families first to pay privately for a certain amount of years. And of course, if you can't pay for those years, then you can't stay in that facility. So a little more in depth about each of these. Starting with Medicare. Again, I said Medicare will pay for care only if you are getting rehabilitative care. And there are a few more requirements for that as well. Medicare will pay for care only if you stayed overnight in the hospital for at least 3 nights before being admitted to the facility that you're in. So if you're going to be receiving care in a facility and first you went to the hospital and you stayed there for at least 3 nights, and you have to be admitted, not just under observation. This is one of the things that we fight with hospitals about a lot. And that is that you have this, or they have this policy where they will say, okay, we're going to let you come into our hospital and you probably need some help with stuff, but we're not actually going to admit you. So you're going to sit here in the emergency room, or we're going to put you in another room and we're going to put you on observation status. We're going to keep an eye on you, make sure you're okay, but we're not actually going to admit you to the hospital. And then if they do that and they don't admit you to the hospital, and then they send you on out to a facility that's going to provide some care for you, even if that's rehabilitative care, now Medicare is not going to pay for it because you didn't meet that 3 overnights. So even if you sat in the hospital for 2 weeks on observation status, Medicare is not going to pay. So that's a thing that I can't say enough. If you or a loved one or somebody that you know is in the hospital and they're expecting that Medicare is going to pay for the rehabilitative care they need afterwards, make sure that they know they got admitted and make sure that they stayed there for 3 overnights. Then it's generally skilled nursing rehabilitative care. Almost always rehabilitation is done in a skilled nursing facility. Very, very, very rarely you can receive that kind of care at home or in another setting. But I would say about 99% of the time it's in a skilled nursing facility. And that's what Medicare will pay for. They will pay for that other 1% of the time, but it's very rare, and I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it right now. Medicare pays 100% of the cost only for the first 20 days. After that, they only pay 80% of the cost for the next 80 days. This sometimes confuses people. They think that they have full coverage from the Medicare that they pay for the first 100 days of this care, and they don't, and they get a big bill. People who have Medicaid or Medicare supplemental insurance, that supplemental insurance almost always pays for the difference. That's one of the reasons people get supplemental insurance, is that there are these gaps in what Medicare will pay for, and supplemental insurance fills in those gaps. And finally, you're not guaranteed 100 days. So again, Medicare is only going to pay for that time if they believe that you are actually getting rehabilitated. So if you stop making progress in their eyes towards doing better, or if you refuse any treatment, or they just decide, hey, you're not going to get better, they'll quit paying, and they'll give you 24 hours notice. I mean, they don't give you a couple of weeks to figure something out. They will stop on a dime, and then you can appeal that. Those appeals are something that occasionally we do. And it's pretty rare to win those appeals. almost always Medicare gets to kind of cut that off when they have made that determination, and there's not a lot of arguing with them over it. So just important to know that when they get to that point, they'll stop paying, and it doesn't matter if you got your full 100 days. Next thing I want to talk about is long-term care insurance. This is another way to kind of try to plan ahead for paying for this stuff. Long-term care insurance, like other insurance, you pay ahead of time in premium, and then when you get to the point of whatever the event is, in this case needing long-term care, then the insurance comes in and pays for that thing. So in this case, it's paying for a portion of your long-term care each month. Almost no long-term care insurance pays 100% of costs each month. Usually it's half of the costs up to a certain amount per day that it will pay. Really the only exceptions I ever see to that are either policies that are very old or policies that are like state benefits for like law enforcement officers sometimes, or firefighters will have some long-term care benefits that work where they'll pay for 100% of everything. But it's really rare. And even those benefits, it's not the same for everybody. And the newer the benefits are, the less likely they are to pay for that much long-term care. They also, most of them have a time limit or a total payment limit. So you might have your care or your policy might pay for half of your care per day up to $150 a day. And that then maxes out at, say, 2 years, or maybe it maxes out at, $200,000. Those policies can be set up with different limits, both maximum limits, daily limits, and percentage limits on what they're going to pay. Those insurance premiums have become really expensive as well. So whereas this used to be kind of an easier insurance to get, and it wasn't very expensive because insurance companies thought, hey, this is a racket. We can, take all these premiums, and then people only get the money back if they need long-term care, and people didn't need long-term care, or they didn't need it for very long. So insurance companies were making a lot of money on it back in the day, and it wasn't very expensive. Well, now that's not true at all. Today, people are living much longer, and they are needing care for a much larger percentage of time. And so now the premiums on these policies are much higher. And also it's very hard to get, because this isn't health insurance. You can have pre-existing conditions or other reasons that they can deny you long-term care insurance. They're not bound by the same rules as healthcare insurance. So it can sometimes be hard to get, and then it can be exorbitantly expensive. So it's really something that you need to weigh the cost-benefit analysis of whether it's really worth it to you or not. There are a couple of types of policies that I want to mention that might be more useful when we're talking about this stuff. The first of those is a hybrid policy. So when I have clients who come to me and they say, okay, well, but should I get long-term care insurance? I've thought about it, and here's what I thought I might get. This is the kind of policy that I will generally try to kind of encourage them to look towards. So a hybrid policy is long-term care insurance and life insurance. It's both. So it's one or the other. If you need long-term care, then it pays out like any other long-term care insurance does. But if you end up dying and you didn't use your long-term care benefits, hybrid policies generally pay back at least the premiums, sometimes more, in life insurance to your descendants. And so even if you didn't use the insurance you paid for, you still get some benefit from that, at least what you paid in premiums. Because again, these premiums are expensive. And whatever kind of policy you're getting, if it's a long-term care policy, it is expensive. So at least this way, there is a death benefit then for your beneficiaries. Sometimes it's even treated as whole life insurance, meaning that if you need long-term care, you can use the money for that. If you don't, then you may be able to take a loan out of the value of the cash value of the policy. And then the other kind is partnership policy. So a partnership policy is a long-term care insurance policy that you are taking out purposefully because you're planning on at some point needing Medicaid. And you might think that's crazy. Say, hey, how am I going to know if I'm going to need Medicaid? I don't know. I've got X amount of assets, or I'm still earning and I'm still putting away X amount every month, and I will be fine. I don't know if I'm going to need Medicaid. I can't plan for that. Well, I think that there is a certain level of ability to plan for Medicaid. If you have $5 million, are you going to need Medicaid? Probably not. If you have a house and $100,000 and you're near retirement and you saw earlier what this stuff costs per month, then if you need care, are you likely to need Medicaid? The answer to that question is probably yes. So it is possible to kind of plan ahead for, I might need Medicaid. One of the ways that you can do that are partnership long-term care policies. I don't see these very often. It's not my favorite way to do this planning. In Washington and Idaho, it might be more useful in some other states, but I do want to go through and just kind of explain them. So partnership policy is a long-term care policy where you pay in a certain amount, and that partnership policy then will pay for X amount of dollars of your long-term care first. Then when you apply for Medicaid, you get to keep that X number of dollars in additional assets and you'll qualify for Medicaid. So if you had a policy that was a $50,000 policy and that policy paid for the first $50,000 of your care costs, and then after that, you had $52,000 left, and ordinarily you'd only be able to have $2,000 to qualify for Medicaid. I am going to talk about Medicaid here in a minute. Then you would actually get to keep an additional $50,000 of assets and qualify for Medicaid because your partnership policy already paid for your care, so the state didn't have to. That's the idea behind those policies. Again, I don't see them very often. I think they're kind of an out-of-the-box tool for this kind of planning. It's pretty rare, the situation that they really make a lot of sense, but they are there as a tool, and that's kind of how they work. VA benefits. So, of course, the Veterans Administration has different benefits for veterans of wars and non-war, of wartime and non-wartime veterans. The one that really applies here is it's actually a rating. It's a pension rating, not a disability rating. And so it's available regardless of whether you have a service-connected disability, meaning you didn't have to get hurt while you were in the service and have some effects of that in order to use this benefit. But there are some requirements to use it. So this aid and attendance rating allows you to get benefits to pay for long-term care. And it's a monthly stipend that gets paid to wartime veterans who need care. So it gets paid each month, depending on what your income is and how much your care costs. You get a certain amount, just a check for that amount each month that comes to you. Wartime veteran, in this case means that the person served at least one day during wartime. You do not have to have boots on the ground in the war. You don't have to be in a foreign place. You can have signed up for the Army and be in basic training, and then the war can end the next day, but you served one day during wartime. You also have to have served at least 90 total days or have had a medical discharge if you didn't serve 90 full days. And then finally, you have to have an other than dishonorable discharge. So honorable discharge, medical discharge, anything, as long as it's not a dishonorable discharge. If you meet those three things, then they do a means tested benefit. So that's the start. That makes you a wartime veteran. And then if you meet these other criteria, I'm going to tell you here in a second, then you can receive this monthly stipend to help you pay for long-term care. You can also help your spouse pay for long-term care. So means tested in this case, the requirements are, again, you have to be a veteran or a spouse of a veteran. Your monthly medical costs have to exceed your monthly income. And then your assets are limited to $130,773. This does not include your primary residence. It would include any other residences you own, any money in the bank, IRAs, basically everything else counts, just not your house. The maximum monthly benefit is based on whether you're a veteran or a spouse and how many dependents you have. For veterans, the average ends up about $2,300 a month, and for spouses, it's more like $1,500 a month. And then you cannot have gifted assets in the previous 3 years before you apply. So this is a newer thing that's came about just a couple of years ago for VA. It used to be that you could give away anything and then you could get VA benefits the next day because you didn't own it anymore. Well, they instituted, like Medicaid, a look-back period, though it's shorter than Medicaid. So if you gifted away assets in the previous 3 years, then that can get you a penalty period for the veterans benefits. So the way that works, that about every $2,300 that you gifted away, then they're going to not pay your benefits for a month. So if you gifted away $23,000, there's 10 months there in which you're not going to get those VA benefits before they're going to start them. Does that make sense? By the way, if any of you need to stop me at any point in time and ask questions, please do. So that brings us to Medicaid. Like I said, this is the big one. Pays for more than 2/3 of long-term care in the United States. And it is most of the time what we're talking about when we're looking at crisis planning. So crisis planning means planning in the moment when somebody hasn't done planning before, but now somebody needs care. A lot of times they'll come to me or another elder law attorney and say, okay, mom, dad, spouse, or myself, now I'm in the hospital. I need care I didn't think I was going to need, and I didn't do a bunch of planning ahead of time, so what do I do now? So usually crisis planning involves Medicaid planning. Not always, but often. It's a federal and state program. It's funded by both, and it's run by the states. So the federal government sets certain guidelines, and the states have to follow those guidelines, but then they can set their own limits above and below that. Medicaid pays for care in any setting. So this can be in-home care, it can be up to skilled nursing. And the way it works is that you take, so each month when you get your income, you're going to get to keep a bit of that income, and then you're going to participate most of it towards your care, meaning you're going to pay it to the facility or to the in-home care provider. And then Medicaid pays the rest every month. So this is the other reason that we often use Medicaid for this kind of planning. If your care is so expensive that there's no way you can afford it, if you're in skilled nursing and it's $10,000 a month and your monthly income is $2,000 and you don't have the other $8,000 a month, well, Medicaid will come in and pay for the difference no matter what it is. This is different from VA, where there's a limited amount of stipend that can come in each month. Medicaid will pay the difference no matter how much that difference is. It's that guy that had a $33,000 a month bill. When we were planning for him, Medicaid was definitely the way to go because he could not have otherwise afforded his care under any circumstances. Medicaid is, of course, means tested. I think everyone's pretty aware of that. I'm going to talk about what the means test looks like here in a minute. And there are ways to plan ahead to incorporate Medicaid planning and preserve assets. So all I want to say about that part right now is if you are planning anything for the future, if you're doing your estate planning, or if you're trying to figure out how am I going to plan for these kind of costs that might come up later, talk to someone like me and ask questions because it may be Medicaid incorporated and it may not be, but there are lots of ways to plan ahead and think about this and utilizing it. And this is what it's there for, is to help people pay for this kind of care. And so definitely ask a lot of questions and think about this stuff when you're doing any sort of future planning. Medicaid requirements. So first of all, your cost of care must exceed your income in most cases. So that's in the state of Washington. In some states, there are income limits and there are trusts that we use to kind of get around that. Idaho is an example of that, where we use a trust to take care of that income difference. So just because your income is higher, if your cost of care exceeds your income, there are still ways to get you the help you need from Medicaid in order to pay for your care, even if you have a higher income. So don't think that your income is going to automatically dissuade you from or disqualify you from being able to get Medicaid. You must require assistance with 2 activities of daily living, or be blind or significantly cognitively impaired and need help with 1. So if you have significant cognitive impairment, maybe a dementia of some kind, and you'll need help with medication management, for example, you could still get Medicaid to come in and help pay for that care. Same thing with being blind. Otherwise, you need to require assistance with 2 activities of daily living. And those activities of daily living are much more defined. So they're, eating, toileting, transitioning, medication management, and then a few others, dressing, bathing. If you are a single person, then your assets are limited to a house. So everywhere you can have a house, the equity limits vary. In Washington, that equity limit is 595,000 right now. It's lower in Idaho. It's different in other states as well. You can have a vehicle as long as it can be used to transport you to appointments. So you can't have a vehicle that sits in your yard and doesn't run. It has to, or a vehicle that's parked in another state that you haven't seen for 5 years because your kids got it. It's got to be a vehicle that's available to transport you to and from appointments. Even if it's not used for that, it just needs to be available for it. You can have a prepaid burial plan and burial plot. This is one thing I tell everybody who talks to me. Having prepaid burial plan is an excellent way to spend some money. So when you do this, not only do you get to pay today's costs or today's rates for the cost of your future funeral, so you're saving some money on inflation there. Also, as long as it's irrevocable, it's not going to count against you for Medicaid in any state. And then it's something that's taken care of, and you get to plan it. If there are certain things that you want or do not want, then you can set up your funeral however you want it to be. Tell everyone, instead of telling people what you want and hoping they do it, you can really pay ahead and plan it with the person who's going to the funeral home that's going to do it for you, and make sure that it goes exactly the way you want it. Same thing, a burial plot is also not countable. So technically it's a piece of property, but it's not going to count against you for Medicaid purposes. You get to keep all your personal property. So, that's not really something that, you don't have to worry about how much are your clothes worth. And then $2,000 in other assets. And this is the sticking point. This is where people always get pretty worried, like, why would I use Medicaid? I have to be completely broke. I'm not going to get down to having only $2,000 in other assets. If you are married and your spouse doesn't need care, then your spouse can also keep any amount of equity in the home as long as that spouse lives there. And then these are the Washington limits, but there is a community spouse resource allowance in every state. It varies somewhat as to what the level is. It won't be more than that $128,064 because that is a federal limit. But that lesser limit there in Washington, that $58,075, that amount can be different state to state. A lot of times it's based on the amount of assets the couple has and cutting it in half. And so in Washington, your spouse can keep another $58,000 up to $128,000 if you're in skilled nursing. So those rules are complex and they vary state to state a little bit, but there is always another chunk of assets that the spouse gets to keep if they don't need care as well. And of course, they get to keep their own personal property. Again, we have a look back period. This time it's 5 years instead of 3 years like it is with VA. So you and your spouse have to have not gifted assets in the 5 years prior to applying for Medicaid. If you did, in Washington right now, you'd be penalized 1 month for every $10,000 you gave away. That number there is the average skilled nursing Medicaid rate in the state. And that number varies state to state. And so the divisor is different in each state, but it works the same. So if you gave away money, there will be a number, a divisor. In Idaho, it's closer to $8,000. And that's the number by which you will divide what you gave away. And then the state will say, okay, well, we're not going to pay for your care for X number of months. There are exceptions that I'm not going to bore you guys with right now. I'm going to talk more about this in my next presentation anyway, but there are some exceptions to the penalty period for gifting. So just because you gave something away, it doesn't mean you can't get Medicaid. You should always go and talk to somebody and ask questions because there are things that we can do to work with that. And this is the one thing I want you to remember and kind of take away from today is you don't have to go broke to get Medicaid assistance. There are lots of avenues and ways we work around this stuff, all completely legal and above board. And you really don't have to necessarily lose everything in order to qualify for Medicaid. So if you get in a situation and you maybe didn't plan ahead and you think, oh, well, I didn't do anything ahead of time, so now I'm within the 5 years, I just have to spend all my money. Don't do that without talking to somebody because that's oftentimes not the case. The the best thing that all of you can do, that anyone you know can do in order to kind of get ahead of any of this stuff, because all of this is conjecture, right? We don't know what's going to happen. But what you can do is have a good estate planning, or have good estate planning documents. So when you do go do your estate planning, don't go to just an estate planning attorney. They're not bad attorneys, but their job isn't to think ahead and think around corners the way that we elder law attorneys do. So what we do is we plan for this stuff ahead of time, and we create estate plans that are flexible and have protections built into them to try and preserve assets for surviving spouses and loved ones and even yourself. And we know kind of what documents down the road are going to need to be there and what they need to look like in order to allow us to best serve clients. And so please at least talk to an elder law attorney when you're thinking about getting your estate planning done. That's probably the best thing that anyone can do. And then one other thing, Medicaid, of course, if they do pay for care, they get to put a lien on anything you own when you die. And so any kind of Medicaid planning is going to not only involve qualifying for Medicaid, getting onto Medicaid, but also trying to avoid that estate recovery lien in most cases after death. All right, so why does estate planning matter, and why do I say this? First thing is that married couples, when both spouses are alive, can generally protect all of their assets while qualifying one of the spouses for Medicaid. So most cases, if you have just one spouse who needs care, there are strategies that really can preserve all the assets, make sure that that spouse gets on to Medicaid and gets their care paid for, and the other spouse doesn't go broke and is able to keep all of the assets. You may have to restructure the assets, but in most cases, that's a really doable thing when we've got two alive spouses who are married. What we worry a lot more about are when somebody is a surviving spouse, because then the state treats them like a single person. And then we go back to that, $2,000 in a house and a car. And so those are the situations in which we want to plan for, because remember that if you're on Medicaid, most of your income gets paid towards your care. So you only get to keep a little bit of money each month to pay for the things Medicaid doesn't pay for. And that's lots of stuff. They don't pay for dental care. They don't pay for hearing aids. They don't pay for motorized wheelchairs. They don't pay for house cleaners. They don't pay for haircuts. They don't pay for clothes. So there's lots of things that you're going to have to try and figure out how to pay for. And so we try to do as much planning ahead as we can to preserve assets for a surviving spouse. Also, if it's a single person, we want to make sure that we have as much flexibility as possible in their estate planning documents to do the kind of different processes and strategies we can do for single folks. They have a good base of estate planning documents. So one thing I always want to mention is if we do have a couple, one of the best things you can do to protect your surviving spouse is having a will-based estate plan. This is particularly true in Washington State. The one place I would say it's not true is California. And again, it's not because this strategy doesn't work. It's because probate in California is absolutely terrible and overrides almost every other kind of planning we ever do. But in pretty much every other state, you want to at least consider and talk to someone about doing some will-based estate planning. And this is because living trusts, and this is true in all states, including California. We use them for different reasons in California, but living trusts do not provide protections from Medicaid, creditors, or any other threats to your assets. If you put your assets into a living trust, and you are the trustee and the beneficiary of that trust, it's just like you still own them when it comes to whether the state's going to count them as your assets and whether creditors are going to seize them and whether Medicaid's going to lien on them when you die. So you may have heard, get a living trust, it's going to protect you from everything. It's going to, you won't own your assets anymore. You won't have to go through probate. And that is, in most cases, entirely not true, except sometimes the probate part, but not even always then. So if you have a living trust-based plan, especially if you're a couple, but even for single folks, at least take it and have somebody look at it, because it's probably not doing you the favors that you might have thought it was. As far as while you're alive, the single most important thing, however, of all is your powers of attorney. I'm going to talk briefly about supplemental needs trust, and then I'm going to talk about powers of attorney, and then I'm going to be close to done and hopefully give you guys a chance to ask some questions if you have any. For supplemental needs trusts, these are trusts that are testamentary trusts. So I just said you don't want to have living trusts. So now you're probably like, well, why are you bringing up a different trust? Well, this is not a living trust. These are testamentary trusts. They're created when someone dies by their will and through their estate. And these kind of trusts, when properly drafted, do protect assets. They protect assets from Medicaid, creditors, and other threats, but they are created by a will through an estate. Nothing in that trust is counted as an asset as far as Medicaid is concerned, which means that if you have a couple and each of them has this supplemental needs trust in their will, then their spouse can be the beneficiary of that trust. Half of the couple's assets can go into that trust, and they can't be counted as an asset, which means they don't have to be spent down, which means that the surviving spouse can spend the rest of their money, get onto Medicaid, and then there's this whole chunk of money here that can pay for anything that spouse wants or needs, but can't be forced to pay for care, so it can supplement the Medicaid benefits that that spouse is receiving. And there are ways that we can protect actually more than 50% of the assets. That's a whole different discussion for a different day, but if you have any questions about any kind of supplemental needs trust planning, just call me and ask me, and I'll be happy to explain it to you at any time. And then incidentally, just these trusts can also be used to protect a child or a grandchild or any other heir in addition to or after a surviving spouse. So they're not just limited to the spouse. Powers of attorney. I said these are the most important documents you can have while you're alive, and I stand by that. That is for not only for this kind of long-term care planning, but just in general. If you have a power of attorney, it means that you want to nominate someone who can help you with financial or healthcare matters. So this is you choose the person, you nominate them, you put them in your power of attorney, and then you give them the abilities that they need to help you with these things. This is the single best way to avoid a guardianship. If there is already a power of attorney in place, a court is far less likely to grant a guardianship. And a guardianship means that someone comes and asks to be appointed as your guardian, and a court says, okay, yeah, this person now gets to be in charge of you. We don't care that you're an adult. We don't care what you're, what you want. What this person says is in your best interest is what goes. And I try to avoid guardianships at all costs. They're expensive, they're invasive, and they take away your rights. Powers of attorney never take away your rights. So you want to make them as thorough as possible. You want to put as much as you can in there, because if the power of attorney allows someone that you chose to do something on your behalf that needs to be done, then there's no need for a guardianship, and there's no need to take away your rights. The power of attorney only allows someone to help you. You still drive all of the decisions, and if you can't make decisions or you can't communicate decisions, then what you want when you expressed it to them and what's in your best interest is what drives those decisions. So it doesn't take away your right to make those decisions, and they're always revocable. So I encourage everyone, if you don't have one, to have that be the first thing you do is get powers of attorney. You want to make them immediately effective because you want someone to be able to help you even if you're not unable to manage your own affairs. And the example I always use for this is if somebody broke their leg and was bedridden and needed someone to go down to the bank to pay a bill for them, or needed to get a prescription picked up. Well, if your power of attorney says it's only effective if you're unable to manage your own affairs, and somebody tries to go get a doctor's note to that effect, well, if you broke your leg, you're not unable to manage your own affairs, but you also can't get that thing done that you need done. So making your power of attorney immediately effective, since it doesn't take away your rights, I think is almost essential. I do very occasionally do powers of attorney where clients have insisted that they don't want it effective unless they're declared incompetent, and I will do that for them, but I almost always try to encourage them to make them immediately effective. And also, they don't expire. So I hear a lot of times people will say, well, powers of attorney are only good for 5 years, or they're only good for 1 year. It's good to have yours reviewed to make sure that it has all the powers that you need, but they don't expire. And so whoever's telling you that, it's probably a bank or somebody else who just wants to make sure that it's still valid, that you're still allowed to do whatever it is you need to do under that power of attorney. And you can just do an affidavit for them that says, yes, it's still effective. But they don't expire. And here in Washington now we have a law with some pretty good teeth on it to force banks and hospitals and such to listen to powers of attorney. That wasn't always true here. It's not always true in every state. But those powers of attorney don't expire just because a bank says, we don't like it anymore. And then finally, last thing I want to say, once again, when in doubt, ask. If you are wondering if your estate plan is thorough enough and flexible enough, go ask an elder law attorney to review it. If you have a long-term care situation and you don't know what to do, it might require a bunch of those different strategies that I brought up. So it's best to have someone who knows what they're doing with all of them. So a lot of times I see people who think, oh, well, we'll just need veterans benefits here. So we'll go get veterans benefits. And they'll do some planning for those VA benefits, but those benefits are only going to last them long enough, maybe 2 years. And then in 2.5 years, they're going to need Medicaid. But the VA planning that they did at the beginning involved gifting away some stuff and waiting 3 years. Now they need Medicaid and they haven't waited 5 years. And now they can't get Medicaid because they were planning only for VA. So anytime you need help with any of this stuff, talk to somebody who looks at all of those strategies. Don't just go to one place that only does VA benefits or only does Medicaid annuities, et cetera. Talk to somebody who does all of those things. And it's never too early to plan, never too late to act. There's never a situation where we can't benefit our clients in some fashion. So it's never too early to worry about whether your estate planning is going to cover you in the future if you need long-term care. Because a good estate plan should last you forever and should be adaptable to many, many different situations. And then it's never too late. Like I said, even if you never did any planning ahead and suddenly end up in the hospital and are going to need long-term care, go talk to somebody because we can probably do something to help you preserve some of your assets even at that point. And then last but not least, this stuff is really complicated. Always ask as many questions as you need to. Never go to somebody who says, oh, well, you're only limited to this amount of time and this amount of questions, because unless you do this all the time, it's way too complex. Unless you do it day to day, there's too much here for any one person to figure out and to get through and to remember all of the details and how these things work and interact with each other. So get the help. And most of the time, elder law attorneys are going to talk to you a bunch of times. And we know this stuff is complicated. We're pretty open to that. And you really should just go see if you can get all of your questions answered as many times as you need to. So don't be afraid to ask. That's kind of the main point of this. So I'm going to let you guys ask some questions. Before that, I'm going to stop my share here and I'm going to stop recording.